Hey friends, welcome back to my channel. My name is Kim and today we are here to do a combined January-February wrap up because let's be real, I didn't do a January one. So let's get into it. I'm gonna go ahead and just do this in the order that I read the books. So we're gonna start with my very first read of the year of 2020, which fingers crossed is better than 2021. So the very first book that so technically I started this in 2021 and finished it in 2022, but we're gonna count it as a 2022 read. And that was Death in the Spotlight by Robin Stevens. This is a middle grade mystery. It is part of a rather long series. This is actually the 7th book. I believe there was 9, well, there are 9, and I think the series is done, but she's writing kind of like some spin-off short story type collections that are in the same universe, world, whatever you want to call it. But anyways, this is about two girls, Daisy Wells and Hazel Wong. In the very first book, I think they're like 9th graders or whatever you call that in the UK, because this takes place in the UK and it also takes place in the it's been a minute, so I'm like forgetting what year it is. I feel like it's like the 1940s. We're gonna say 1940s. It's somewhere between like the 1920s and the 1940s. So I can't really talk too much about the plot of this one, being as it's the 7th book in a series, but essentially it's about these two girls that go to a boarding school in England, and they start like their own detective society. And that is kind of kicked off when, in the very first book, a teacher's body is found in the school, or at the school, and they try to solve the murder. That's like the very first book, and each book they have a different case that they're trying to solve. It's kind of crazy because these two kids really attract a lot of death. Like the fact that this is all like taken place within, I would say, 2 years, and they have like 7 different times been involved in a murder case. I don't know how 2 14 to 15-year-olds are involved in this many murders, but here we are. It's a really cute series. I gave this 3 stars. I think I've given almost every book, except for like the Christmassy one and the first one, I've given 3 stars. I really enjoy them. They're fun, they're quick, they're middle grade. They're really, really easy to read. If you like Agatha Christie style murder mystery type books, I think this is worth a read, this series. I think the first one was probably the strongest in my opinion, but I am planning on reading the rest of the series as well. I have the second 2 books, so I'll be getting to them at some point this year, hopefully. Next, I read One by One by Ruth Ware. In the beginning of January, I was really in the mood for some snowy thrillers. And so I ended up reading this one, which I had owned for quite a while before I actually picked it up and was meaning to get to. So it felt like the perfect time. And then the next one, which is actually quite similar, but we'll talk about that next. So One by One by Ruth Ware is about this group of people. They all work for the same company. It's like this social media music app where basically you can listen to what other people are listening to. So you could like listen to your favorite celebrities what they're currently listening to, not just like their playlist. Like you can kind of like listen in on what they're currently listening to at that moment. And it's called Snoop. Not a real thing, obviously fictional for this book. But the coworkers all go on this retreat, and there's a lot of like drama about shares and like who has ownership over the company, and they want to do something with the company, and they're all arguing over it, and they're kind of like split down the middle. There's a lot of that. So if that's gonna bore you, like I know some people didn't like it because there's a lot of business talk in it. I didn't really find it that overwhelming or like it took over the story for me. I feel like it was an appropriate amount for them to be talking about, considering that was kind of the conflict in the book. But this goes from like isolated mystery to kind of insane over the top ending. I won't spoil anything, obviously, but I enjoyed it. This was like a very middle ground 3-star book for me. It was fine. Like I didn't love it. I didn't hate it. I definitely didn't hate it as much as some people who are giving it like 1 star did. I thought it was fine. Like I thought it was decent for what it was, and I enjoyed the atmosphere. And I would say it's worth checking out if you want like a snowy thriller. Just don't expect too much out of it. Then I read something that was a little similar, but in my opinion, a lot better. And that was The Sanatorium by Sarah Pierce. So as I said, I was on like a snowy thriller kick, and these two were ones I already owned. This one was so well written. This is her debut novel, I found out after reading it. And she's a really, really good writer. Like, the writing in this is just next level, in my opinion, compared to a lot of thrillers I've read. And I really appreciated her writing style and just how poignant and eloquently she writes. The description, the atmosphere was just like on point for me. This takes place at a sanatorium, as you could guess, where basically this is like a detective story. So it's kind of a detective story. So Ellen Warner is the main character, and she is a detective, but she's not working a case, so to speak. She's actually on vacation with her husband at this like hotel that has been made from a sanatorium. Like, the sanatorium obviously closed down, and then they transformed it into this like boutique hotel up in the snowy mountains. I forget exactly where this takes place. I believe it's in the Swiss Alps. Yes, the Swiss Alps. And this one, basically they get there and they're on vacation. She's not like working or anything. She's actually taking time off. She's been off for quite a long time. She's on leave because of something that happened that we don't know about in the beginning. And of course, like, something happens, someone dies, and she gets kind of drawn in, and it reminds her why she loves being a detective, and she starts working the case unofficially. It's really fun. I think that the atmosphere is like really what did it for me, and I really related to the main character. I don't know if that's a good thing because she's kind of messed up, but I just really felt like I connected with the main character. I loved the main character. I thought she was so like, I don't know, just relatable. And I thought the mystery was really interesting. I love that it took place at a sanatorium. I thought that was kind of creepy and cool, and especially like in the snowy mountain atmosphere. But yeah, definitely would highly recommend. This is probably my favorite mystery thriller that I've read so far this year. Then I picked up one that I've had on my TBR for a little while. I actually bought this like brand new when it first came out, and then it got terrible reviews, and I kind of put off reading it. But I finally read it in January, and that was The Final Girl Support Group by Grady Hendrix. So this is actually the third Grady Hendrix book that I've read. And I'm starting to realize that maybe I don't really like Grady Hendrix's books. I feel like that's kind of blasphemy because like so many people in the horror community love Grady Hendrix, but I've given like every one of his books 2 or 3 stars. Like, I just don't get it. I don't know. So this one, I actually didn't hate as much as everyone else did. I remember everyone else was giving it like 1, 2 stars. Like, people were hating this book. I didn't think it was that bad, actually. I thought it was pretty on par with the other Grady Hendrix books I've read. I actually liked this one better than one of his other ones that I gave 2 stars. I forget. I've read Horror Store, this, and Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires, which everybody loves, gave that 2 stars. Didn't like it at all. But anyways, this one is about, as you can imagine, a final girl support group. It's like these 5 or 6 women who were all final girls in some sort of tragedy. It plays off of a lot of the classic slasher movies. Like, each one of them is supposed to reflect a slasher movie. Basically, I forget which ones are represented, but it's kind of like the big ones like Nightmare on Elm Street and Friday the 13th. I think there's one that represents Scream. And basically these women get together in this support group, and they meet with this therapist, counselor, don't know exactly what her title was, I forget, but they all get together and kind of talk about their experiences. But at the start of this book, many of them are wanting to end the group. One of them is wanting to leave the group. But of course, right as that's happening, somebody starts killing off the final girls. And this is really like a straightforward thriller. Like, you're really just watching them. It's kind of like a slasher. Like, you're watching them just get killed off, and the main character is running from this person who we don't know who it is. And it was fine. Like, I gave it a 3-star. I thought it was okay. I enjoyed it. I thought it was entertaining while I was reading it. Do I remember much about it? No. It was definitely slow. I get why people were giving it such low ratings, because for a slasher, it's like very slow burn. And the main character is pretty unlikable. I remember hearing a couple people say that they just didn't like the main character. She's kind of a lot. Like, I didn't hate her, but she's kind of a lot. Like, I can see why people don't like her. That doesn't really bother me. But for me, it was just kind of mediocre. Like, I didn't get much out of it. I thought it was fine. And like I said, I've given his books 2, 3, and 3 stars. So I think maybe Grady Hendrix is just not for me. I still own Best Friend's Exorcism, which seems to be everybody's favorite. So maybe I'll try that because I own it. But other than that, I think we're kind of like moving on from this. After that, I picked up a Stephen King book. I read Later by Stephen King. And this one is one of his latest. I don't think it's his newest. It might be. Who knows? He publishes so many books I can't keep up. But Later is a supernatural thriller, crime thriller about this boy who I literally forget his name already, but he is like 13 at the start of the book, 8th grade, and he can see dead people. He can see them like right after they die. There's a lot of logistics to it, but essentially like they fade away eventually, but he can see them for a short period of time right after they die. And he sees them in the condition they were when they died. So like if somebody's like head gets smashed in, he sees them with their head smashed in. This is very much what it sounds like. He basically gets recruited by his mom's partner at the time, not like detective partner, like life partner. And she's an FBI agent, and she recruits him she finds out that he can do this thing where he can see dead people, and she recruits him to help with this case. It's very dark and gritty, and it gets really confusing because it starts getting into like talk of demons and curses, and it kind of lost me at some point. Very middle ground. I think I was hoping for a bit more of the crime aspect. I was hoping to see more of him trying to solve cases with this FBI agent. Like that's what I went into it wanting, but it's definitely more on the supernatural end. There are some creepy scenes for sure. Did it scare me? No, but I could see why people enjoy it. But for me, it was kind of just like, okay, 3 stars. Then I read Where They Found Her by Kimberly McCreight. This one I got from the library, so it's already away from me. I read this for Gabby's book club, The Book Troop, and probably not something I would have picked up on my own, but I ended up really enjoying it. I do appreciate Kimberly McCreight's style of writing. I think she's a really good writer and she can craft a pretty good story. For me, this one was just a little too complicated. There were a lot of characters to follow and you're like constantly switching perspectives. It's basically about this woman who is a journalist, or she becomes a journalist. She starts working for the newspaper. She wasn't originally a journalist, but she has just become a journalist. And she gets put on this story to cover a dead baby that was found. And she has her own past that makes this difficult for her to cover, but she ends up covering it anyway. Her husband is very concerned, and it's basically just trying to figure out like what happened to this baby. And you're seeing all these perspectives of these people in the town that are all in some way tied to the death. I think the multiple perspectives made it really hard to follow, honestly. I kind of wish we had just followed the journalist perspective. I really liked her perspective, and I thought it was the most straightforward to follow, while the other ones kind of didn't add anything to the story for me. They just made it more confusing. I definitely think I'll pick up more by Kimberly McCreight. I'm pretty interested in her newer novel, Friends Like These. So I'm interested to read more from her. This just wasn't quite it for me, but it got 3 stars. Okay, then I read one that was quite a delight. That was The Maid by Nita Prose. I really, really enjoyed this. I gave it 4 stars. I read this for another book club, Lights Out Book Club, and I'm glad that I picked it up because I was interested in it, but I probably wouldn't have read it as soon as I did, and I'm glad that I got to it right away because I really, really enjoyed the story. So this is about a woman named Molly Gray, Molly the maid. She is a maid at this like really fancy hotel, and she's a bit socially awkward. They never really state her diagnosis, but it seems like she maybe has some symptoms of Asperger's or autism. And she is just a little bit awkward around people. She kind of struggles with communicating with others. She struggles with understanding social cues. And I thought she was just like the sweetest, most endearing character. I know some people feel like frustrated by her naivety, but I actually thought it was really sweet, and I just loved her as a character. She was so great. But essentially she works at this hotel, and she walks into this room to clean and finds a dead body. And then she has to like report it, and she gets kind of caught up in this whole murder investigation. And at one point, like, she becomes a suspect. I won't say much more because I don't want to spoil anything, but it was really, really fun. I loved this writing style. I would definitely pick up more from Nita Prose. I think this might have been her debut novel. And it was just such like a cozy, fun mystery. I really, really enjoyed this one. Then I finished a book called The Lost by Natasha Preston, another one I got from the library. I actually buddy read this with my friend Jen, so shout out to Jen. And this one was, I mean, I gave it 2 stars. So it was basically about this girl and her friend. They're teenagers. It's a YA book. It's actually like a Wattpad book, I believe, that got published, or she's a Wattpad author that got published. And you can kind of tell this wasn't like a traditionally published book. It's not very well written, honestly. I've never read anything else by this author, but the writing's pretty subpar. And basically these 2 girls, they get taken by these 2 teenage boys, or I think they're like maybe in their early 20s, the boys. They meet them at a party. They just very stupidly agree to go off with them, and they get captured and taken into this situation where they're being like held captive with these other teenagers in this location, this isolated location, and they're being like put into different rooms to get tortured. I guess this could be horror. I guess this is horror. I don't know what to call it, but horror, thriller. The whole book is them being stuck in this place getting tortured. Like, there's these different rooms that they get put in. One is like temperature, so they make it really, really cold and then unbearably hot. One is sound, where they like blast sound really, really loudly. And it's very basic. And the girls in the book were so dumb. Like, the decisions they made, it was just like, I know teenagers can be impulsive, but like, I'm pretty sure most teenagers are smarter than that. And then like the ending was just like totally ridiculous. Like, I'm not gonna spoil anything, but it just got more and more ridiculous as time went on, and it was not a good book. I would not recommend. Then I read Reckless Girls by Rachel Hawkins. This is a pretty new thriller. I believe it came out in January, and it is about a girl named... Literally doesn't even say her name in the description. Okay, so there's this girl, forget her name, and her boyfriend, and basically they live on Hawaii, and there's this island called Moreau Island. It's this like deserted island that some people like to go to because it has a creepy past. A lot of people have died there. There were people stationed there during World War II, I believe, and soldiers died there. It's got this like creepy vibe. So the boyfriend has a boat, and the girlfriend followed him to Hawaii and is like working as a maid, but she gets fired like in the first chapter from her job. These 2 girls hire the boyfriend to bring them to Moreau Island. They pay him a lot of money to do so. The girlfriend decides to go, and pretty much the whole book is them on this deserted island with these other 2 girls and these 2 people that they meet when they get there that were like already there. This book, like, nothing happens until the last 50 pages. Like, if you're looking for island vibes, it has that. But this really reads more like a contemporary than a thriller, in my opinion. And maybe that's because Rachel Hawkins typically writes contemporaries. I know she did The Wife Upstairs, which I read, but most of her books have been contemporary up until the last 2. And you can kind of tell because her books still read like a contemporary, but then they have like these like really out there thriller aspects to them. That doesn't even come in until like the end of the book. So I don't know, this was fine. I gave it 3 stars because it had good vibes. It was entertaining enough while I was reading it. Like, I was intrigued and entertained enough to keep reading, but for the most part, it was just kind of like, fine. It gets like really ridiculous at the end. So if you don't like over the top, ridiculous endings in your thrillers, like, I would just steer away from it because you're having to get through kind of this very long buildup. and then it goes from like 0 to like 100. So I don't know, it was fun. If you're looking for kind of just something entertaining to read, it's like a good beach read for the summer, but I thought it was fine. Then I read Squad by Maggie Takuta Hall, and this is a graphic novel I got from the library. I kind of just wanted something that would be quick and fun, and this looked quick and fun. It was not great. I gave it 2 stars. It is basically about a girl, it's about werewolves, to be very simple. So teenage girl, it's a YA book, teenage girl moves to a new school, and she gets kind of taken in by the popular girls. It's like Mean Girls, but like not nearly as good or funny, and with werewolves. So she gets to this new school, this popular squad decides they want to take her under their wing and they like her. And so she starts hanging out with them, going to parties, being teenage girls. And then she finds out that they're werewolves because they go to a party and she finds out that they're luring boys to their death and eating them. And then once she finds out, then they're basically like, either you become a werewolf or we kill you. And so she doesn't have much choice. And so the whole book is basically her and her werewolf friends and things like, I don't know, I feel like this book was trying to do things like send messages about right and wrong, and it tried to have a moral, but it was honestly just kind of cringy. I mean, I spend a considerable amount of time talking to teenagers as an 8th grade teacher, and I don't feel like this was at all accurate to how teenagers speak. Like, the dialogue was so forced, and it 100% felt like an adult trying to talk like a teenager, but like one that didn't understand what teenagers actually sound like. It was like so over the top and forced. It was so cringy. And yeah, just the whole thing was kind of a mess. Like, I didn't really get the point of it. The artwork was beautiful. I will say that. Loved the colors, loved the artwork, but the actual plot was pretty trash, honestly. Wouldn't recommend. There's definitely better YA graphic novels out there. Just a few more to go. Okay, so the next one that I read was All I Want by Darcy Bell. I'm obsessed with the color of this. Hot pink is my favorite color, and I absolutely love this combination of like hot pink and yellow. This has a really cool concept, and it's basically about this woman who, her name is Emma, and her husband Ben. They decide to move from the city into this like upstate New York house, and it's super creepy. It used to be an asylum or a rehab. I think it was technically a celebrity rehab, but like creepy things happened. There's supposedly a cemetery, like people were killed and buried in the backyard. And it's this creepy house that no one has wanted, but they decided to buy it because there's a theater in it, and Ben works in theater. And she essentially ends up like in the house alone a lot. She's pregnant and Ben still works in the city. So she spends a lot of time up there alone, and he spends a lot of time in the city at his apartment working. And creepy things happen. It had like haunted house vibes. There were some creepy journals and people being seen in the fields and cemeteries and things like that. Like, this had so much potential, honestly. But it just was so not done well. Like, it fell apart. I have never read anything else by this author. And honestly, I probably would have stretched it to a 3-star because like it was atmospheric enough. However, the ending was awful. I'm not going to say anything. I won't spoil it. But oh my God, like if you've read it, if you know, you know, right? Like, if you've read this, and you read the last chapter, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It just takes a huge nosedive, and I hated it. The last chapter ruined the book. I threw it across the room, and I was like, that was so dumb. Why would the author do this? I feel like I finished the chapter before that, and I was like, okay, that was good enough. Like, I probably would have like been nice and given it a 3-star, but that last chapter just totally destroyed the book for me. And I can't tell you why because it was a spoiler. It's a spoiler, but yeah, I don't know. I don't really think this is worth picking up. There are so many better thrillers out there, honestly. Like, this one it just wasn't worth it. It's quick. Like, if you're interested, it's like 200 pages. I read it really quickly, but I just think there's better out there. Then I read another snowy thriller, and that was The Overnight Guest by Heather Gudenkoff. Hope I'm saying that right. This one is about a true crime writer named Wiley Lark, and she is staying at this isolated farmhouse in the winter, and she gets snowed in, and she goes out into the snow and finds this little boy that is like curled up in a ball and freezing to death. And so she rescues him and brings him inside, and the story goes from there. This, contrary to the synopsis, which just focuses on that aspect of the story, actually has two different storylines going on, or three technically. So in addition to seeing Wiley in this situation where she's finding the kid, you're also getting a flashback to the year 2000 where this brutal murder happened in the same town that she's in. So you're getting kind of like the story of these two people that were murdered, these two parents that were murdered, and you're seeing it from the point of view of their daughter who survived. And so that storyline is going on at the same time, like running parallel to this. And well, not the same time period, but it's running parallel in the book. They're alternating chapters. And that's more of like a detective storyline because you're really seeing the investigators trying to solve that murder. And then you're flipping back to this point of view with Wiley. And you're also getting a third point of view, which makes absolutely no sense to you at first, but then like starts to make sense as the book goes on. But I really can't say much about that one because it feels like a spoiler. So I feel like I wanted to focus on like the Wiley storyline. Like I picked this up because I was interested in that aspect of like the true crime writer finding the kid, snowy isolated farmhouse. Like that was what I wanted. And a lot of this book is the murder investigation that happened in 2000. So just know going into it, that's what you're getting. A lot of people really loved this and gave this 5 stars. I gave it 3. I don't know if it was just that I went in with the wrong expectations, but it was fine. Like I enjoyed it. It was entertaining. I thought it was a really well-crafted story. I thought the way that the author pulls together the 3 different perspectives in the end was like really well-crafted. I would definitely pick up other things from this author. Like she's a really good writer. I didn't love what it did. Okay, and then the last book that I read in February was The Silent Woods by Kimmy Cunningham Grant. This was another one I read for the book troop. It was the February pick. And again, not something I probably would have picked up on my own, but I'm really glad I did. I enjoyed this one. I gave this technically a 3, but I feel like it's more of like a 3.5. I just, Goodreads. So this one is about this man whose name is Cooper and his daughter Finch. They live in this really isolated house in the woods. They don't ever leave the house or go anywhere. Like Finch has not been out into the world since she was like a baby, which she doesn't remember. So like her whole life is basically this house and her dad, and then their neighbor Scotland, who comes over every once in a while, and then this guy named Jake, who's the dad's friend, who comes once a year to bring them supplies because they don't leave the house, and so they need somebody to be able to like go to the store and get them stuff that they can't grow, like clothes for Finch because she's obviously growing. She's 8 in the book, and like things like oatmeal and other things that they need from the store to kind of like stockpile. So he comes once a year. The whole premise of this book is that Jake does not show up this year when he's supposed to, on the day he's supposed to. Jake doesn't show up. And then they're kind of forced to go out and restock themselves. There's a lot to this story. It's definitely like a slow burn. So just kind of go into it knowing it's a bit more of like a literary thriller, I would say. Not that that was a bad thing. It was just a little more slow paced than I'm used to with thrillers. But it was really well written. And so I loved the atmosphere of this. Like that was my favorite thing about this. It genuinely made me want to go live like off the grid in the woods. Like it was just so calming. Even though it was a thriller, like it was so calming that they just had this very simple life, like their whole life was just this cabin and like going out to hunt and like pick berries, and I don't know, they just had such a simple, nice life that made me a little jealous. But yeah, I loved the atmosphere of this. Finch was like adorable. I loved the relationship between Cooper and Finch. It was like, it was just so cute. That was my favorite thing about the book, I think, was the atmosphere and the relationship between Cooper and Finch. And Finch was such a great character. She was really well developed, which I feel like you don't always see with younger kids. Like when you have a kid that's like 8 years old, I feel like sometimes that can be an undeveloped character, but I think they did a really, really good job with Finch. She was so clear and so relatable in so many ways. I just loved her as a character. Like I really cared for her. And yeah, so I really enjoyed this. I think it's worth picking up. It was probably my favorite book that I read in February, even though I only gave it a 3.5. So that tells you what my February reading month was like. But yeah, would highly recommend. So that wraps up my January and February wrap up. Let me know in the comments what you read in the last 2 months and what your favorites were. And also let me know if you've read any of these books and you enjoyed them or didn't enjoy them. I would love to chat with you about it. I will see you guys in my next video. Bye.